Washington, D.C.
Tonight, let's make a deal. Iran says it's reached an agreement with Oman to reopen the Strait of Hormuz temporarily after President Trump teased a deal was imminent. But we've heard a promise of reopening before and an end to the war many times. Plus, Michigan makes a left. Progressive Abdul Al-Sayed wins the state's Democratic Senate primary by a narrow margin. We'll discuss what his win means for the future of the party and what he'll need to do to secure victory come November. Plus, the other side of the aisle, former Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin joins us in studio this hour to discuss the Republican agenda, the conflict with Iran, and his new education policy initiative. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons, alongside Joe Matthews.
And we begin with breaking news on a deal in the Middle East as Iran says it has reached an agreement with Oman to resume shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. But we have yet to hear from the White House on any deal as President Trump wraps a two-day West Coast tour with a speech touting his tax policies outside of Las Vegas. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you see the stage set, remarks set to begin at any moment. And we start this evening at the White House, where Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan is standing by. Kate, what do we know about the elements of this deal, and is the U.S. part of it?
That's right. So we're still waiting on details from this. We don't have official word yet from the White House on whether this deal has been reached. We had heard from the president that it could come as soon as today. And what we do know is that it's focused on a temporary agreement focused solely on opening the Strait of Hormuz, reopening this critical passageway that oil flows through. And Axios is reporting that it would be a 60-day temporary agreement to allow ships to pass through. It's an agreement. It's really a management agreement between Oman and Iran. And it's also aimed at trying to get the ceasefire back on track between the U.S. and Iran. Under this deal, inbound traffic would go through Iranian waters and outbound traffic would go through Omani waters. Now, the deal would reportedly give Iran greater control over the strait, and that's a key point because before the U.S. and Israel launched this war and started this war back in February, this was a completely open international waterway. There was no one country that had control over the strait, and Iran did not have the kind of control that it would have under this new agreement. But negotiations are still ongoing. It seems to be a fluid situation. And it's also important to note that this deal is not a broad, lasting peace agreement. It's not a nuclear deal, which is what, on the nuclear point, the president has said that this is why he started this war. He wanted to make sure that Iran did not get a nuclear weapon. But this particular deal deals solely with the Strait of Hormuz and is not a nuclear agreement. It's not based on curbing Iran's nuclear enrichment. And of course, Joe and Kaylee, we know that over the past 6 months, we've seen a lot of iterations of this before in terms of there is a deal or a deal is imminent and then talks completely break down and strikes resume. So we're still waiting to see exactly what's in this deal and how long it holds.
Well, and we'll see, Kate, if we get further commentary about it from President Trump as he's about to take the stage at the Red Rock Casino outside Las Vegas, Nevada, to talk mostly about no tax on tips, right? Is this a speech we should expect is going to stick on the economy?
That's right. So that's what the White House says it's going to be focused on. Of course, with the president, this speech could really go in any direction. It is very possible that the president talks about Iran, even if he doesn't talk about the specific deal, that he just talks about it in more broad strokes. But what the speech is supposed to be is a shift from the Iran war and back to the economy and domestic issues. The president is supposed to tout his tax policies, specifically no tax on tips, which is a proposal that he unveiled in Las Vegas just a few years ago when he was running for president. So that is what it's supposed to be, but we'll see what it actually ends up being in reality.
All right, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan on the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. And turning now to Michigan, where progressive candidate Abdul Al-Sayed won the state's Democratic Senate primary with 48.5% of the vote, securing a narrow victory over Representative Haley Stevens in a blow to the party establishment. The close race was called Wednesday morning, with Al-Sayed calling for unity against his conservative critics, as he now will be up against Republican Mike Rogers in November. And joining us now for more is Bloomberg Government's Zach Cohen, who is live on Capitol Hill for us this evening. So, Zach, this really was pitted as a race that put the future of the Democratic Party on display, the establishment ring versus the progressive, even socialist wing. What are you hearing about today in terms of Democrats' confidence that they will be able to keep this blue seat now that El-Sayed is their candidate?
Michigan certainly is pivotal to Democrats' hopes of trying to unseat Majority Leader John Thune and Senate Republicans from the majority here in the Senate. Michigan is such a swing state. Trump has carried it, and obviously has statewide Democratic elected officials. And so this contest between Congresswoman Haley Stevens from the Detroit suburbs and Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, a former public health official from Wayne County in Detroit, really was a pivotal moment for Democrats' question of, where does the party go from here, and how does the party evolve going into the 2028 election? El-Sayed's election comes shortly after a couple of other more progressive candidates, even unseated incumbent members of the House of Representatives in places like New York and Denver. And so this is part of an ongoing trend that we're seeing from the Democratic base that's really frustrated with the state of play here in Washington. A lot of El-Sayed's platform was based on things like a single-payer health system, Medicare for all, has been pushed by Senator Bernie Sanders, ending military aid to Israel, especially as we enter a couple of years of this ongoing war between Israel and Gaza, and that's support among Democrats for that support is waning. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years, if those dollars can even go to Jerusalem once Democrats are in control.
We're going to talk in just a couple of moments about some of the economic currents that were driving results in Michigan with Betsey Stevenson. But, Zach, everyone up on Capitol Hill is looking at their watch right now, trying to figure out when the Senate is going to leave town and what can be done before that. I know it's August recess time. Will we see action on a continuing resolution, on clarity, on Todd Blanche?
Everything is sort of in three different buckets. There's a must-do, there's a wish list, and there's a reach. Certainly, funding the government in October is a must-pass vehicle. Whether that has to happen right now is sort of subject to debate, but there is bipartisan interest in taking a shutdown off the table before the midterm elections. There's wide bipartisan support for this sort of straight short-term funding patch. There's some haggling over a provision related to definition of hemp, particularly intoxicating hemp products. But once that's resolved, we expect that to pass with a wide bipartisan margin. However, a market structures bill related to cryptocurrencies is a little way off. There is not a clear path forward for that bill. There is not yet the 60 votes necessary to move that forward, as Democrats in the White House are exchanging offers on potential ethics guardrails, especially given the fact that President Donald Trump is himself a billionaire in part because of his crypto holdings. But there are some other things that they want to do, like move Iran's war budget, the $95 billion budget framework from the House of Representatives. And there's some ongoing questions about, they don't have 50 votes for that either. And so the question becomes, how much does Senate Majority Leader John Thune want to get off their plate before they go to August recess? And how does Trump feel if they don't get everything done, including, for instance, grants to the states to try to implement some of the voter ID and election verification rules that Trump really wants in place in time for the next presidential election?
A lot to cover in very little time. Zach, it's great to have you with us live from Capitol Hill. Bloomberg's Zach Cohen joining us now for more on the economic trends, as I mentioned, that drove the race in Michigan is Betsey Stevenson, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan's Ford School of Public Policy, former chief economist at the Department of Labor in the Obama administration. Hey, Betsey, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg. We're going to try really hard not to force you into the role of being a political analyst here, but what message were voters sending in this primary about the economic mood in Michigan?
I think what we're seeing is across the country, some voters becoming incredibly frustrated with what they see as a system that they just don't stand a chance in, that's not fair, that is rigged to support certain people and really to churn other people out like they have little value. And I don't think there's anything that's happened in the last few years to convince people that they're really seen very well by either party. I think President Trump, that's what he won on in 2016, was tapping into some anger and some frustration. And he hasn't really delivered in this to those people in this last couple of years. And the left has its own movement of people who are super frustrated, who are willing to try really different things. And I think you're seeing them start to come out and say, you're worth voting for. And other people are not as inspiring to get the voters to the polls.
Well, when we consider some of the actual campaign promises or pushes of Abdul al-Sayed and what we're hearing similarly in races across the country and in places like New York, some of these ideas are being framed by President Trump and other Republicans as being communist in nature or socialist. And I wonder if you do see from an economic point of view, economic viability in some of these notions around the idea of Medicare for all or child care for all, of universal basic income. Are these things that the United States would actually be able to make work in reality?
Okay, so let's start with the easy ones, like thinking about Medicare for all. Every developed country has health insurance for its people, except for the United States. So we went a different direction. It's really hard to turn the boat, right, so that we do something different, like some kind of universal system. And, I think there's a lot of confusion over universal systems because France's system is not the same as Australia's, is not the same as the UK. I think the reason people in the U.S. talk about, Medicare for all is because, even when Medicare was originally designed, it was designed as if it would apply to everyone. And it was kind of a compromise to cap it at 65. So I think that's probably the easiest place for the U.S. to go. But I think absolutely the U.S. can afford to have a health insurance plan that covers the entire country. Keep in mind that we have the highest administrative costs of running healthcare of, again, really any industrialized developed country in the world. And as a result, we spend a lot more and get worse outcomes than people get in other countries. So can we do Medicare for all? Yes. Could we do universal child care? Again, we've seen that around the globe. We could definitely do universal child care. I think the issue of having a more universal cash benefit, that's something that's obviously not as tried and tested. And I don't think that we're necessarily in a good place for that yet. But I think a lot of people in the tech industry are talking about it because if AI delivers what it says it's going to deliver in the next 10 years, well, we will need to find a way to make sure everybody's able to share in some of that income that's generated. Otherwise, we're going to have inequality absolutely explode in the United States. And I think that kind of explosion of inequality is absolutely untenable for an economy or a political system.
Well, Betsey, the president is speaking out in Las Vegas. He's trying to seize on the issue once again of affordability, and he's doing so from a Las Vegas casino, which is interesting. But voters are seeing reports saying that the economy is creating jobs, wages rising, inflation bound from its peak. The president has said that they won on the issue of affordability, referring to the Republican Party. So why do so many Americans still feel like they're falling behind?
So, there's one word answer: inflation. And it actually means that a lot of Americans are falling behind. So if you look at what's happening to wages, we have had a month where, inflation, so prices rose faster than wages. But more generally, if you look at the last many months, if you look at people who've stayed in the same job, so we separate that wage growth between people who change jobs versus people who stay with the same employer, there are wages for stayers, which is a lot of people. I haven't changed jobs in the past year, right? A lot of people stay in the same job. All those people have seen that they can buy less today than they could have bought when Trump was first elected.
Well, and on this question of inflation, Betsey, obviously the market had a bit of a reckoning with itself and with the new reality of a Kevin Warsh Fed in the aftermath of his press conference, in which there was concern that he wasn't going to be fully committed to getting on the right side of the inflation question. And I wonder if you also subscribe to that kind of worst case scenario narrative of the Fed allowing inflation to get out of control, and if you expect it could.
I don't think that we're going to see inflation get out of control. So first of all, I think that the Fed Reserve Chair, it does not have that much power, right? The FOMC makes decisions by committee that vote, and there's a lot of sensible people. You saw some dissenters. Those dissenters were saying it's time to raise rates. I think the reason they didn't raise rates is there's a really good argument for not having raised rates yet. If I was on the board, I might not have voted to raise rates either this time around. But if what we continue to see is pretty good employment, but ongoing inflation running 2.5% to 3.5% to 4%, absolutely they're going to have to raise rates sometime very soon. And I think that fundamentally, I think that that will happen. The institution of the Federal Reserve has been shook very hard over the last year, and it turns out is very difficult to break. And I think we should all feel really reassured by that.
All of that said, does the jobs report on Friday, Betsy, tell us anything new?
Well, every month we get a new big collection of data. What we saw was a slightly weaker report last month. Remember that it's incremental adjustments. So you don't want to, it's not going to be a whole new day when we get 1 month's worth of data, but it is going to tell us, are we continuing to see job growth? What do the revisions from the last couple of months look like? Should we continue to feel pretty confident that the labor market's strong? My personal take is the jobs data has looked so strong for the last year that even a bad report, let's say we have really a bad report next month, it wouldn't convince me that all of a sudden employment was a bigger issue than inflation. And I'm just going to say out loud, for those of you who don't know me, I am like the biggest dove out there, right? So I'm a big dove, but I still think we've seen really strong employment growth over the past year. And this inflation is just sticky. And I really want to see it taken care of before it gets harder to take care of.
All right, self-proclaimed dove, Betsey Stevenson, thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power. And the rally that's added $3.7 trillion to the S&P 500 took a breather today. For the details now, we turn to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nia-Malika, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York. Nora.
A faded risk appetite on Wall Street today. We did see pretty much earnings and a U.S.-Iran deal optimism really driving the market today. Strong earnings reports coming out from several companies, but we saw some laggards with Alphabet, AMD, and Amazon, the biggest laggards in the market. That essentially driving the S&P 500 to end lower by about 0.2%. The Nasdaq 100 lower by 0.8%. There was some commentary that also came out from the Fed's Neel Kashkari saying that it's time for the Fed to gradually begin raising rates. So as you take a look at the Treasury market, it wasn't too interesting, a bit of a nothing burger, but holding steady, seeing the 10-year right now still in focus and keeping an eye on that there. We're seeing the 10-year yield sitting at about 4.6%. And a lot of these earnings still, of course, underscoring this AI optimism. You saw scrutiny when it comes to SpaceX, still seeing results that were strong. But the question is that AI spend, so the attention in the market still remains on the tech industry more broadly. And geopolitics, of course, as I mentioned, in focus. We do see oil holding tight, about steady right now. We do see Brent crude sitting at about $79 a barrel. And, of course, a lot of earnings to parse after the closing bell today with all eyes on Sandisk.
All right, Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nia-Malika with the latest on the markets. We thank you. Coming up, the hard part may be just starting for Abdul El-Sayed following his close win in Michigan. Now faces the task of uniting Democrats for the general election. Nia-Malika Henderson joins us next on where Michigan's Democratic Senate nominee goes from here on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. Abdul El-Sayed's victory in Michigan yesterday was the latest success for the party's progressive wing, as Democrats look to bridge the divide in order to gain back control of the House and Senate in November. Joining us now for more on the victory and what follows it, Nia-Malika Henderson, Bloomberg opinion columnist, with the headline, "This should be El-Sayed's to-do list now." Aren't you making this easy to write the roadmap for him? As you write, It's great to have you back, Nia.
Good to be here.
He needs support beyond the cool kids on the internet. So what's the first stop on the to-do list?
Listen, I think he's got to call Jim Clyburn, who criticized him during this primary for not having robust African-American support in Detroit, in Wayne County, in those areas. And you saw that in the returns. Haley Stevens nearly pulled this off, even though she looked way behind in a lot of the polls. She nearly pulled it off because she was very, very strong among Democrats' traditional base of African-American voters, older voters as well. And listen, if you're Abdul El-Sayed, congratulations. You beat the centrist candidate who had the backing of Schumer and a lot of outside spending, but there is now a lot of work to do to piece together the Democratic coalition, which is split almost down the middle, right? And the difference is, yeah, I mean, the difference is between, its age, it's, sort of generational, it's ideological. And so he's got a lot of work to do to speak to a broader coalition and make it a real big tent party. And then he's got the general, right, to worry about as well.
Well, is the job convince those people not to vote for Mike Rogers, to vote for you instead? Or is the job simply to convince those people to participate?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do think he is somewhat lucky in the sense that his movement, they're obviously backing him, right? And traditional voters, they're not protest voters, right? They're not going to stay home. They're not going to go vote for a third party. They are much more likely to fall in line than sort of the sort of cadre of voters that are already following El-Sayed. So that part, I think, will take some doing. I think he'll be able to get it done. But then, of course, he's got to pivot to a general election. And you already know what the playbook from Republicans are going to be. It's essentially that he's a radical, he's extremist, which I think, and we should be honest about this, it hits differently, right, to call someone an extremist who is Muslim, right? It kind of, it lands differently, right? I think those sorts of attacks, anytime you're talking about a person of color, a person of a different faith, average voters can sometimes hear those attacks in a different way.
We were just talking with Betsey Stevenson about the economic factors behind the race here, with affordability being a huge issue. Noteworthy how close this was. There were some polls, the Emerson poll specifically, that had a 15-point spread here. If inflation were not such an issue, maybe if there weren't a war in Iran to raise gas prices, could Haley Stevens have won?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sure, as is her part, sort of the establishment wing are doing sort of Monday morning quarterbacking, coulda, shoulda, woulda. Could they have had people endorse her earlier, right? Some of the folks like Gretchen Whitmer, for instance, didn't really get in the game earlier. If they could have run up the score a little bit more, maybe among African-American voters, though she did do a real job in going to these different neighborhoods. So, I mean, but listen, those polls had him way up.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you would have, last night I was thinking, they'll call it maybe, at 10 or 11. And, it came down to the wire. And it's certainly a preview, I think, of what the general election is going to be. It's going to be incredibly close to 2024. Senate race there was incredibly close, too, came down to 20,000 votes or so. And then Mike Rogers is going to be a very tough out for the Democrat. And listen, they need to serve if you're a Democrat, right? If you want to regain the Senate, you've got to hold on to Michigan, you've got to hold on to Georgia, and then grow from there. You have a real problem if you're a Democrat and you can't hold on to Michigan.
Must win.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Bloomberg opinion columnist Nia-Malika Henderson, thank you so much. You can, of course, find her latest on the terminal and online. And still ahead here, ever heard of the Education Freedom Tax Credit? Former Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin wants you to know about it and for more states to opt into it. He joins us live for more on his new policy group, data centers, and his party next on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg.
Nothing is more important than our kids. So who'd be against scholarships for tuition, tutoring, services for kids with disabilities, all paid for by a federal tax credit with no state dollars?
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. And that's part of a campaign by Empowering America's Parents, a new policy group launching a multi-million-dollar media blitz heading into the midterms, supporting the Education Freedom Tax Credit. a scholarship program to promote school choice that was created by last year's One Big Beautiful Bill. The group was launched by former Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia, and he's joining us now in our D.C. studio. Governor, welcome to Bloomberg.
Great,
it's good to have you
be
here.
with you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for really shining a bright light on this critical topic, which is education freedom for families all across the country, simply enabled by governors opting in.
Well, so talk to us about what it is they would be opting in here and whether this would in some way detract from public schools.
Yeah, well, as you said, as part of President Trump's Working Families Tax Cut Act, the education freedom tax credits were enabled, and they unlock state-by-state scholarship opportunities where if you want to support scholarships in Virginia, because I opted in, I was the first governor to opt in, then you can donate up to $1,700 and get an immediate full tax deduction from your federal return. And those scholarships can then be used for tuition. They can be used for tutoring. They can be used for equipment. They can be used for transportation. They can be used for families that have a developmentally disabled child who need extra services, students who are going to private school, but also students in public school. And it's funded by private donations and a tax credit. And therefore, it doesn't take a single dollar away from state education funds. And in fact, it's additive to it. And so there's really no reason why a governor would not opt into this. And we have 30 states that have opted in, but we have 20 that haven't. And the 20 that haven't, I believe, are putting politics in front of the needs of their citizens, because these scholarships can be life-changing. And therefore, I'm asking governors across the country opt in. And we're going to work through empowering America's parents to educate American citizens and families that this is available to them, but they need to reach out to their governor and tell them to opt in.
So where are the politics here? Why are people saying no? Is this being seen as a glorified voucher program? What would be the opposition?
Well, the primary opposition comes from the teachers' unions. Okay. Because they don't want to see anything damage the monopoly hold that they have on education today, when in fact they should be for this. Because it not only, yes, provides opportunities for private school tuition for families that otherwise couldn't afford it, but it provides also funds and scholarships for students in public school. And the bottom line is, the way this is structured, that over 90% of America's students would be eligible. I mean, this is as close to universal school choice as we can get. And the idea that it takes money away from public education is just wrong. And therefore, we should start telling the truth. And governors should opt in and not put politics in front of their kids.
Well, I have to ask you, as you are clearly focusing a lot of your political capital on this initiative at a time when the country is at war. It's fueling higher gas prices. People have affordability challenges that they often talk about, from gas to groceries to health care. Why is school choice such an important issue?
Well, first of all, affordability is the top issue in voters' minds right now. And I understand why. I mean, listen, the Biden-era inflation that was unleashed on our nation has had a long tail. And it still presents itself at the grocery store and lots of other places. And, of course, with crude prices that have been elevated because of the Iran conflict, we're seeing gas prices elevated as well. But now we see them coming back down. And, of course, oil prices today are around $75, and we're seeing gas prices come back down. And I think the work that is being done by Kevin Warsh will also translate into really de-inflationary kinds of policies. And as a result, I think we're going to see coming into the fall, a real opportunity for us to celebrate the strong economy that we have, but also recognize that this concern about affordability is real. Now, affordability also translates itself into how am I paying for my child's either tuition at a private school or for the things they need to go to public school. And education is a huge issue in voters' minds. 75% of voters say that K through 12 education is one of their top 3 issues when they vote. Of course, affordability is the top one. And so here's a chance for us to really push for governors to opt into a program that addresses 2 real issues for voters. Affordability, because it provides scholarships that don't cost their state anything in an area that they really care deeply about, of course, which is the education of their children.
Well, so you're speaking to affordability in a very compelling way. The president is actually speaking to it right now in Las Vegas by way of the One Big Beautiful Bill and no tax on tips, where this very program that we're talking about was born. But he's also said that Republicans have won on affordability and that it's a Democrat hoax. Is that not the right view?
Well, I think what we all know is that the record inflation that was unleashed during Joe Biden has a long tail. And the Democrats have done a really good job of trying to convince Americans that the economy is failing. And therefore, what a lot of people are seeing every day, which is, of course, elevated prices resulting back from 2 or 3 years ago.
But you had a tariff regime and a war in the Middle East, and they're ever higher.
Yeah, well, I think what we've demonstrated first is that the war in the Middle East is a real impact on fuel prices. And we know fuel prices are a major contributor to prices and everything else. Crude's a meaningful input into most manufacturing processes. And of course, transportation costs for every good that's transported around the country. And so as gas prices went up, of course, we've seen some upward pressure on inflation. And I think as gas prices come back down, we're going to see this inflationary pressure relieved, and we're going to see prices abate. This is what we've seen time in and time out when it comes to gas prices moving up and down. And that's why I think it's so important today for us to recognize the underlying economy is really strong. Listen, the GDP print that was at 1.5% in the last quarter was really masking incredibly strong growth in consumer spending and in business investment. And the only detractor from it was, in fact, large inputs of machinery and tools that are going into all the factories that are being built all over the United States. And so I think we also see, as Secretary Bessent said earlier, a real opportunity for real strong GDP growth in the back half of the year as the record exports that we had in the second quarter are actually going to take charge over imports. And I think we're going to see GDP very strong in the back half.
Well, you mentioned factories being built. It's not just factories. It's also data centers. This is obviously something that Virginia knows very well. Data Center Alley is not too far away from us now. And I wonder, as a former governor, how you're viewing the current debate around the proper approach policy-wise to data centers and regulating their development. We saw a moratorium put in place in New York by Governor Hochul, but this seems to be bipartisan. Governor Abbott yesterday says that no data centers in Texas are moving forward until an audit is completed. What's the right approach here?
So the data center debate is a real debate around issues that matter a lot to voters. And so my first approach on the data center debate is it needs to first take place at the local level. Because at least in Virginia, and I can't speak for how it works in every other state, the localities are where data centers are approved. So I've always felt that local governments, county supervisory boards and city councils should be where these decisions are taken for the zoning and all the appropriate permitting for a data center in the locality. And if a locality doesn't want it, well, then they shouldn't take it. I think, second of all, the issues around power are real issues. And the president has gone to work to push all of the developers to put power behind the meter. And in Virginia, when I was governor, we actually passed a bill that I signed that enabled our regulatory authority to create customized rates so that large users of power would pay more. And appropriately so, pay more, because they're the ones who are using large amounts of power. I think these kinds of developments are really important. Listen, there's a lot of money that's going to be invested in the data center community. And
Is there too much money?
Well, supply chains come with it. And, one of the things that I have wanted to just make sure I correct the record on is there are a lot of jobs that do come with data centers, a lot of them. And some of them are missed because it's the supply chain that comes into it. Everything from the power supply equipment manufacturers and the HVAC equipment manufacturers and the folks that put the racks and stacks together and the service companies. It's tens of thousands of jobs in Virginia. And so this debate is not one we should dismiss. And in fact, I strongly have advised government leaders and, of course, the business leaders to engage with communities and listen to their concerns. And it's upon them to actually provide good answers. And if they can't get those answers, then the communities are going to say no. And this is what this is all about. They should not be forced on communities because communities should have this final say. But it is incumbent on the developers and the hyperscalers to recognize that there's real pushback, and they got to go to work in order to address some of these major concerns.
That's fascinating to hear from you, especially knowing Virginia was the data center capital. Maybe it still is. Keep your governor's hat on, but put your old Carlisle hat back on as well. The question that Kayleigh followed up on there's a real concern in the market that this is the late 90s all over again. You were in Virginia when AOL was the biggest media company in the world. We were laying fiber everywhere, building all those data centers. And then there was obviously a few difficult years after that as we digested all that spending. Does that rhyme with what's happening now?
Well, my personal view is that the investment decisions that are being made around data centers are directly tied to revenue streams that are coming off the back end.
Yeah. And
so this is infrastructure. Mm-hmm. This is infrastructure that's required for national security in order to make sure that we can enable our successful competition with China. Yeah. But it's also infrastructure that comes with contractual counterparties. And that means that these data centers particularly have revenue that meet their investment needs. I mean, that's the core to any investment decision. Now, if you're building things and with hope, build it and they will come mentality, sure. Well, then, you may have some challenges. But the vast majority of the data center development is coming with contractual obligations in order to use the compute that's there. Let me just get back to the core issue, though. The core issue is that many, many Americans are concerned. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we need to go to work to discuss these concerns and address them. And if there are concerns around water, let's talk about it. And let's make sure that we're taking care of our water resources. If there's concerns around power, let's make sure that we have rate constructs that demand that our data center hyperscalers are paying much higher rates because they're using much more power, and that they're bringing their own power when they can. But let's do this in a constructive way where we have this dialogue with community members so that they can reflect their views eventually in who they elect to represent them in their local governments.
Well, and we certainly are seeing this as a live issue in this midterm cycle and in 2026. We've heard a lot about it across our conversations across the country. I would imagine it very well could be in 2028 as well. And we have to ask you about 2028, Governor, because I'm sure you're well aware that people are wondering if you will eventually throw your hat in the ring to run for president. President Trump suggests that he likes J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, and potentially there could be a Vance-Rubio ticket in the offing. Would you rule out running against a chosen taker of the mantle?
Yeah, I've been asked this a lot, and I've answered it the same way every time, which is I don't anticipate being on the debate stage. Somebody just asked me in an interview, is this about 2028? I said no. Jerry Baker asked me in an interview recently when I was with someone who's clearly running on the Democrat side, will we see you both in the debate stage? I said no. I'm really focused on issues that I believe translate into better futures for Virginians and Americans. And education right now is one of those most important topics. Listen, K through 12 education in America is broken. We know this. We have literally 60 to 70% of our young students who aren't proficient in reading and in math. We see this declining as opposed to improving as many states are actually reducing expectations for their kids in order to tell a lie to their parents that they're doing well. And meanwhile, they can't read and write. This is the travesty of K through 12 education, and this is why we have to unleash school choice like we are, but we also have to fundamentally transform our public education by raising expectations of excellence, by providing multiple pathways for students so that they can pursue their passion and maybe get an industry-recognized credential right out of school and go to work in one of these great fields. In Virginia, we drove that in a big way to the point where we had 90% of our students who graduated with an industry-recognized credential. I mean, this is hugely enabling for students. But on top of that, we got the cell phones out of school. We had record investments into teacher salaries and budgets. It takes all of this, but we have to enable parents to be at the head of the table. And when we do that and we focus on transforming public education, I think we have a shot of transforming our education system from the failure that it is today to a successful education system that unlocks the dreams of our kids.
I feel like a speech like that would be noticed in 2028. I don't know about you, but
point of clarity. No, not on the debate stage in 2028 or ever.
Well, that's what everybody keeps asking me, and I keep answering it the same way over and over and over again.
Okay.
And so, again, this issue is one for the here and now.
Yeah.
Governors have to opt in by January 1st, 2020. 2027. So they literally have 4+ months to get moving. And that's why places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona, where we have Democrat governors with citizens who want this, who haven't opted in, they should feel the pressure from their citizens to opt into this great program that provides these great scholarships.
You just worked in some swing states also. You know, it's a problem when they stop asking you about 28, right? You don't mind if we go there. Thank you.
I mean, listen, at the end of the day, I am really humbled every time we have this discussion, but I've been consistent from the day I was elected as governor.
Yeah.
You know, there are really important issues at hand, most important issues at hand. And one of the things I deeply respect about Vice President Vance is he is saying to everybody, focus on 2026. Right. Please focus on 2026. Because, listen, what we've seen, of course, is what we saw in Michigan last night, where the Democrat Party is waging a battle for its very soul. And you see socialists winning it. Yeah. And now you have a socialist candidate for Senate in Michigan, and you're about to see
He's
a socialist.
He's not a member of the DSA.
But you see what he espouses, and I think this is once again reflective of the effort of far-left candidates to present themselves as moderates when, in fact, we know they're not. And look at Abigail Spanberger. I mean, she campaigned as a moderate in Virginia, and on day one, she moved hard left. And Virginians don't like it. I mean, she has the lowest approval ratings of any governor in modern time in Virginia because it was a bait and switch. And that's what we're going to see out of these far-left candidates who then try to pretend that they're moderates so they can get elected, and then they're going to turn around and govern just like he has said over and over again. And we're going to see Francesca Hong nominated on Monday or Tuesday in Wisconsin as a governor's candidate, and she wants to get rid of Thanksgiving. I mean, come on. This stuff is really, really crazy stuff, and I think it's a chance for Americans, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats to come together and say, we're going to stand for the basic belief system of this nation. We're going to disagree on things. We're allowed to disagree on things, and we can disagree without being disagreeable all the time. But we have to stand for the principles that make America, America, and not let the socialists actually take over not just the Democrat Party, but America.
Well, thank you for weighing in on that. You know we're just playing with you on the
No,
rest. It's good to see you. Stay in touch with us throughout this midterm cycle and let us know how the program's going with the remaining 20 states. That's, of course, Glenn Youngkin, the former governor of Virginia. Coming up on Balance of Power, we assemble our political panel as President Trump speaks affordability in Vegas. It's next on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lyons as we assemble our political panel. Democratic strategist Jim Kessler is with us, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, President, CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. We're coming off an in-depth conversation with Glenn Youngkin and others this hour who have been weighing in on what happened last night in Michigan. The view of the Democrat first, by 1 point. If this were a different economic backdrop, would we be talking about Haley Stevens as nominee?
Yeah, I think so. And look, I obviously represent the more centrist wing of the Democratic Party. It was not a good night for us last night, but also it was not a good night for the far left either. El Sayed was expected to win by 15 points, 150,000 votes. It was a very narrow victory. I think the revolution, the Democratic Socialist Revolution, which he is not a member of the DSA, but he's close to it, I think it hit a speed bump last night. So I think both the centrists and the far left have reason to celebrate a little bit and also be concerned.
And is Mike Rogers just in the celebratory camp today,
Absolutely,
Sarah?
we sure are. So he is a great candidate. He is not a far right. He's very Main Street, middle of the road. He was a member of Main Street when he was in the House. We got the best candidate possible last night. I mean, the man is a socialist. And
yet he lost in Michigan in a year that Trump won Michigan in 2024. So what would be different?
He underperformed President Trump. That is true. But he's learned a lot in the last 2 years. He understood his mistakes, and he's running a much better campaign. I really think the Senate's going to come down to Michigan, and I'd rather be us than the Democrats at this point.
Donald Trump agrees, as he wrote on Truth Social. Great news for the Republican Party. El Sayed, a communist loser who hates Jews and Israel, is the projected winner in his race with the socialist. Apparently, Haley Stevens now a socialist. Is that what you're planning to hear for the next several months? How do you run against that?
Right. So, look, El Sayed has work to do. OK, I mean, he has to convince Michigan voters that he is not an extremist, that he is not in love with Hassan Piker, the ultra far left streamer that he's been hanging around with that says America deserved 9/11. Like, he has real work to do to win this election. I think he's got a bit of an advantage because the environment is so bad. He starts with a touchdown lead, but it's a 4-quarter game. And Mike Rogers, I mean, I think Republicans really feel like we have a shot here in what is really a bleak environment for Republicans.
Well, Republicans may be feeling less confident in Ohio now, specifically about the seat that is currently held by Congressman Max Miller, who, of course, is facing allegations of domestic and child abuse. There's been calls for him to drop out. The deadline, I believe, is today. Sarah, I don't know if your expectation is that he will drop his reelection bid, but does that mean that this seat is going to be lost?
It is certainly endangered. I know Max Miller very well. Professionally, he's always been great to work with. I don't know anything about his personal life other than what's come out, which is a huge problem. But it does put this seat in play for Democrats. I do not see him stepping away at this point. Some of the lawyers who looked at it said technically he might have until Saturday. Tonight at midnight is not totally the deadline. I don't know about that, but it certainly is an issue in Ohio. It's a very sad situation, especially for the 2-year-old daughter.
I was quoting the old Wall Street line, a healthy bull market takes out its own trash. This is something for Congress to handle, for the Speaker to handle if he does not step down?
Yeah, probably. And, you know, we've seen this before with, now I'm blanking on his name, now Tom Suozzi has that seat.
Santos.
George Santos. Like, there's a point where you've got to step in here, and the allegations against Max Miller, like, they're so severe.
Yeah.
Like, they're so over the top. He's got to go.
Will it take a phone call from President Trump, Sarah?
President Trump's already called him. So I don't know what it's going to take. Max seems pretty dug in at this point. So I don't know what can get him off the ticket. Obviously, he's now requesting an ethics investigation, which I think would be helpful.
Chuck Edwards just came off of one.
He did. I know Chuck
Republican from
Edwards
North Carolina.
Well,
this is odd because he did push back at first. He's apparently 3:30 in the morning on Twitter dropping his re-election bid. This is tough for a thin margin.
So he was already down to start with. I mean, he is a member of Main Street. He was down double digits. The Democrats have a very strong candidate. Candidates matter. And Chuck and his wife just decided it was time. I know him professionally. I don't know the personal side, but this is a sad situation, and we'll be sorry to see him.
It's more heartburn for Mike Johnson, though.
It is more heartburn for Mike Johnson, and this too is a seat that it would potentially are going to lose. Depends on who steps in, but it's such a late date now to step in.
We have 30 seconds left, Jim, but net, with everything we've just discussed, how are you feeling about Democrats' prospects, Senate and House?
I feel very good because in the Senate, Democrats really have the candidates in most states, North Carolina, Alaska, Ohio, Iowa, Texas, that can win. Michigan's going to be a challenge. Maine is still a challenge.
All right. Jim Kessler and Sarah Chamberlain, our political panel this evening. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.